before I begin, a bit of a correction. The Kenya Business Guide is not based at Strathmore University. I have a lot of history with Strathmore University. I'm an adjunct research fellow at the business school, and I was trained as a policy economist at the business school. The Kenya Business Guide is actually a multi-donor funded think tank, funded by the Hans Seidel Foundation, the Federation of German Businesses in Kenya, and multiple other partners. Just before I begin, I'd just like to give an overview of what we do at the Kenya Business Guide. The Business Guide is a think tank, so we work in the intersection of the public and private sectors, seeking to create a more conducive environment for business and investment in the country. And what we do is we develop curated pieces of information at the back end of a lot of key organizations. Some of you may have noticed that we released an MSME development framework for oil and gas with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, alongside UK Aid and the Extractives Baraza. We've also done a lot of work around Strathmore University through peer reviews. And currently we're working at the back end of the State Department of Planning, trying to create a more robust environment for investment policy. Now, the reason we're interested in the oil sector, and while we often categorize the oil and gas sector, I'd really like to focus on oil today, because the information around gas and etc. requires a separate session. I think the primary driver of the sector right now will be oil in the next few years. And the main reason that we have a strong interest around oil is to create awareness around what the sector actually holds. There's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of lack of information generally around the oil sector in Kenya, and particularly when you go to the counties in which they're held. And before I start, I'll actually give you a story from my recent visit to Turkana that really shocked me and drove the rationale behind this particular brief. So 2 weeks ago we were in Lodwar carrying out a few sessions around enterprise development for the oil and gas sector. And we were driving the Turkana County government around enterprise development strategy, particularly looking at the sector and the needs of the sector. And one of the sessions that we held was for the Chamber of Commerce of Turkana, and included quite a few prominent businessmen located within Lodwar and across the county. When we were discussing the oil sector and just general understandings of opportunities within the oil sector, one of the gentlemen, who apparently is a key advisor of the county governor, mentioned to me that he believed, and he held this profound belief, that oil also contained gold particles. So he asked me this very simple question, that when we get oil, we will also get gold. So the value that will accrue to Turkana is twofold. And he had this very deeply profound belief on this. And I think that's just reflective of the sort of lack of information and understanding of the oil sector. There's another story that I have, but I'll save that for tea time, because I wouldn't want to spoil any names. But yeah, that really drove me to look at, forget Turkana County, even at a national level, what is the understanding of the oil sector? People here have an understanding of it because you work around the oil sector. But generally, the business community in Kenya, those individuals who are seeking local content opportunities, do they understand what it takes to serve the sector? Do they even understand how much oil Kenya holds relative to the world? So this brief was really driven by that, and I hope it starts to enlighten some of you. I hope you've all received a copy of it. If not, it will be distributed through a soft version as well, that you can send to anyone you like, and get people aware about the oil sector. So I've split the brief into, sorry, I should mention that this was co-authored by the Business Guide and the Center for Extractives Industry at Strathmore University, who kindly peer reviewed the document and really provide good content for it. The brief was split into three main parts. The first part is more of a broad overview, and I don't think that's very pertinent for an audience like this, but I will go through it quite briefly. The second part is a Kenya overview, and what I've done is, while we do focus on the upstream sector within these sessions, I've also taken it down all the way to midstream and downstream. And the reason for that is that a lot of the calculations, the profit calculations, and the strategies that we'll use for the upstream sector will actually be influenced by some of the consumption trends, economics and consumption trends of the downstream. So Kenya's actual consumption of oil products. And this will has to influence some of the decisions that will be made regarding the upstream sector. And the final section that we'll do is a simple section on policy and legislation, which of course is the subject of these 2 days. So in terms of the broad overview of the sector, as you're all aware, the oil value chain is split across three: the upstream, midstream, and downstream. And currently, Kenya's had an oil sector since the 1950s. There's been exploration activities since the 50s. The consumption of oil has been there since the colonial period, but primarily our industry was located in the downstream with a few activities upstream in exploration. One thing that is quite apparent within this is that the oil sector as a whole in Kenya has just recently become a phenomenon, and the whole hype around it has just been in the last 3 years. But really, Kenya has been involved in the oil sector as a whole for a while. As you all know, the whole sector is dependent on the prevailing oil price of oil, and that's very susceptible to a lot of different things, including the geopolitics of the world, the GDP growth, economic growth in countries like China and India. Why I put this here is because I'll bring it up a bit later in my presentation about what the price of oil will actually mean regarding different parts of our sector, and how a high price of oil may not be good for Kenya, which is a statement that I will make. African countries generally, and perhaps Kenya we will be yet to be seen, but a lot of African countries have a particularly susceptible economy when it comes to low oil prices. From 2014 to 2017, there was a pronounced difference in GDP growth for oil exporting and oil importing African countries. And of course, this is a manifestation of the popular Dutch disease and natural resource curse that you hear a lot of people quoting, that things like local content and enterprise development around the sector are supposed to fix, or rather supposed to alleviate. And then a quick note there on the global 10-year average of oil consumption. It's actually 1 million barrels a day, which is absolutely phenomenal if you think about how much oil that actually is. So that's the global 10-year average of consumption across the world. And the bulk of this is driven by emerging economies in Asia, so China and India being the key drivers of consumption of oil. We'll see a divergence in this in the next 10 years, where a lot more African countries will start consuming a lot more oil as we're moving to heavier industry, depending on the structural constraints within the economy. But the trend is moving towards Africa and the rest of the emerging world. Now, that was a very simple overview. As I mentioned, you all are probably experts around that, but let's go to Kenya now. And as I mentioned, Kenya has had an oil sector since the 50s. We've been exploring oil since the 50s, and from about 50 to 2010, 32 wells were drilled, but no oil discoveries were found. And then the recent one was, the first discovery was Gamia 1 in 2012. And the approximation is about 750 million barrels across the country of oil reserves, of recoverable oil reserves. And the PwC study, if you subscribe to it, I know a lot of you don't, suggests that it could reach 1.4 billion barrels. But, and this is very important, the proven reserves in Kenya are mere 2% of what Nigeria holds, and just 1.6% of what Libya holds. So really, why I feel it's important to state these statistics is how insignificant Kenya's oil actually is within global context. If we put Kenya's highest peak production capacity within world context, that's 0.1% of the entire world's oil capacity. So Kenya is not going to become a major oil country at all. It's not even close to becoming that. But that fact actually perhaps is a blessing in disguise, especially for the context that we're in. The blessing in disguise is the fact that the oil that we have is significant enough to make a fiscal boost, much needed fiscal boost, to both national governments spending revenues as well as county governments for development and socioeconomic transformation. But yet, it's perhaps not large enough of a discovery to induce a resource curse. That has been the consistent narrative across the continent. That's yet to be seen. Of course, sound governance is the key variable around that. But this blessing in disguise is a narrative that is consistently being used now to describe Kenya's oil. What I think the real value of Kenya's upstream sector will be is actually to kickstart economic growth in some of the periphery counties in Kenya that have been long disconnected from the national economy. Historically, the reason that counties such as Turkana and Marsabit and the rest, West Pokot and all these other periphery counties have seen such less economic development relative to central parts of the country and other parts of the country is two key variables. The first variable was the lack of resources. So not necessarily oil resources, but resources such as fertile soils, resources such as water. And the second was a centralized government that was inherited from the colonial times. So those two variables really kept development within the central parts of Kenya and the regions where resources in terms of fertile soils, rain, etc. were. Kenya is an agricultural economy, and that's why you see the primary brunt of economic development being in the agricultural heartlands. So those two factors have now changed. We now have county governments, so we have decentralized governments that actually focus specifically on those geographic regions. And now we have natural resources in these regions that provide an opportunity to kickstart some private sector development and enterprise development. And I think the oil sector, the upstream sector, actually provides this opportunity. And it's simply an opportunity because there needs to be a lot of strategy and policy put in place in order to really reap the benefits, the holistic benefits of the oil and gas sector in counties such as these. And it is through enterprise development that I am proposing this is going to be achieved. Now, the midstream sector, there's of course all this, right now we're in this period of the almost to the early oil export scheme. So I'll hold off on making any controversial statements. But of course, we all know the Lokichar-Lamu pipeline that is being expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2021, costing about $2.1 billion. And it's a joint venture, or a public-private partnership through the government and the three partners. Now, prior to the completion of this pipeline, it's expected that we'll transport oil by road. So that's the primary midstream infrastructure that we require. But what's really come clear is that one of the key variables for exporting oil in Kenya, the fundamental determinant will be the completion of this pipeline. And any delays in the completion of this pipeline will only delay the exports and benefits that will accrue from oil. So this piece of midstream infrastructure is actually going to be one of the biggest economic variables when it comes to the oil sector. And of course the second thing, and I keep reiterating this because I'll come back to it, is the world price of oil being the second key determinant of how quick we can move up the chain of the sector. Now, the downstream. Up to very recently, there was two main players, the KPRL, Kenya Petroleum Refineries Limited, and the Kenya Pipeline Company. After After the report by the Energy Regulatory Commission in 2008, the KPRL ceased refining activities and has converted into a storage facility with about 45 tanks and a capacity of 584 million litres. The Kenya Pipeline Company has leased these jetties and the storage facilities that are expected to hold the crude for export. And there is a plan for a new refinery as part of the LAPSET project, which currently is being held at the ministry, and we're yet to see whether it will be going forward. One thing that is important, and I would like to stress in this slide, is the two graphs that are there. The first is on the actual quantities of oil products imported in Kenya. And that stands at about 4.5 million metric tons. And the second graph there, which is the pie chart, is the actual use, the consumption of oil products in Kenya. And as you can see, it's also in the briefs that are in front of you on page 5. The bulk of consumption of oil is, the 70% consumption of oil is through vehicles and transport. So the real driver of demand of oil products in Kenya is the increasing use of vehicles, the transport sector, and these. And why it's important to highlight this is because the demand and the consumption of oil products in Kenya is going to be increasing every single year with each new car on the road. And the oil sector, oil products rather, have an incredible feedback on the Kenyan economy, especially on inflation. And that's one of the key points that I'd like to make through this presentation. A high oil price may seem beneficial to Kenya's export of oil because it's one of the key determinants of the fact that we can even export the oil. When oil prices dipped, of course, we saw a resounding reduction in activities from players like Tullow. So the upstream activity, one of the biggest variable is actually the price of oil. But for Kenya as a country, we have to be very careful when assessing the high price of oil. Because of the use and consumption of oil products in Kenya, a high price of oil may actually not be beneficial to Kenya because of the feedback and the impact high oil prices has on other industries and the agricultural sector and inflation as a whole. So a proposition that is yet to be confirmed, and we're working on some calculations, is would a high price of oil actually offset? So the revenues accrued by the national government through high oil, would that offset the economic imbalance created from higher oil prices feedback on the economy? So this is something we really have to consider, and I don't think it's being talked about enough. Because high oil prices for countries like Nigeria are godsend. But for Kenya, during the period where we have lower oil prices, we actually grow faster as an economy because oil consumption is so high here. And the transport sector and all the logistics and distribution really rely on oil imports. So this is something that really needs to be considered, whether high oil prices and our exports will actually, the revenues accrued will actually offset the feedback on the economy. And one thing that is very clear and that has come out from the downstream sector is that the reliance on petroleum products and oil products, the importation, is very unsustainable in Kenya. We've got a reserve capacity of 7 days of petroleum products, and this is very unsustainable, and we need to start to work around either alternatives to oil products or refining our own oil, which is of course a proposition. And as I mentioned, the demand for fuels will increase exponentially in the next 15 years, and this is going to be driven primarily by industry, transportation, and the number of vehicles on the road. And this is, contrasting very sharply with a proposition in the Energy Regulations Act of 2010 that suggests Kenya should reduce its dependence on oil product imports by 25% by 2030, which is unlikely to be met. Now, the last slide I'll have is on local content and enterprise development, which is, of course, is the theme of these 2 days. And I'd really like to reiterate the fact that oil is not going to be a silver bullet in these counties or this country. But it is an opportunity. It is a very big opportunity to kickstart growth in some of the most remote parts of Kenya that have been long disconnected from the national economy. And this is through enterprise development. Local content is what will induce enterprise development. But information, training, capacity around all these things must be carried out. The oil sector naturally does not have a very robust legal and policy framework, which is part of the reason we're here today, is to discuss around that. But hopefully now, through events such as these, we can get concerted efforts to develop policy and legislation towards this end. The lucrative nature and often secretive nature of oil is what makes it so difficult to make policy of. As many of you know, I was part of the initial team that was developing the local content bill for the Senate, and the biggest problem we face is just people not knowing what the oil sector actually is or the extractive sector is. It's so foreign to Kenya that we must really understand the value of information and awareness in the sector. The story I gave you earlier, as I started my presentation, is just a snapshot of the volatility this sector actually could hold if people don't feel the benefits accrued to them that are expected of oil are not accrued to them. So I would like to really reiterate to people in this room who are involved within the oil sector, know about the oil sector, that it is a very niche sector. There's very few of us in Kenya who actually know what the sector actually holds, and the expectations around oil are very high, even from people within Nairobi. A lot of people believe that oil will give us a lot of money, but that's not so. It's really the opportunities that exist around it that we need to grasp. And hopefully through the sector brief that we've created and pieces of information like this, which was a study funded by the K-Expo project and DFID to the KNCCI, which looked at MSME development in the oil and gas sector. And this is one of the key snapshots of information that were found there that was very popular in our visit to Turkana, which is people didn't understand that the indirect services are actually where the money and the enterprise development will be made in Kenya. And I'll leave you with this slide just to give you a sort of understanding of what opportunities actually exist. And really what we're looking at is the indirect services for Kenya and local content. So thank you very much, and I'll be around to answer any questions throughout the course of the day.
Thank you very much, Sahil. I hope that we did learn a lot from Sahil's presentation. At least on my bit, one of the things that I was able to pick out is the fact that as a country, we shouldn't be very exuberant when you hear that oil prices are rising, because now we know that we're going to have oil, and consequently that is going to translate into higher revenues. But then the thing to consider is the fact that we are heavy importers of oil, and so we have to make a balance. We have to sort of look at the balance of the amount of oil that we import, and what that bill is, the import bill is vis-a-vis the revenues that we are going to get from the oil sector. Thank you very much, Sahil. If you have any questions for Sahil, you can catch him maybe during break, or maybe later on as we continue with this meeting. Before I invite Wendia, I would like to acknowledge or recognize the presence of the Senator from Turkana, Dr. Malakai. Thank you very much. And also National Oil for actually joining us for this particular forum. Thank you very much for that. And I feel that it will be good for us just to get to understand who is in the room, so that the people who will be presenting would be able to know who they are actually talking to. Sahil, you are quite apprehensive a bit there, talking about not wanting to sound controversial with some of the issues. So I think if it's good if you know who is in the room, so you're not afraid to say some things. I don't know what you wanted to say at that point, but my understanding is that we are going to start exporting, sort of like transporting oil from Turkana from sometime next week. I don't know. So I would like, very quickly, I would ask just all of us to, you can just stand up and say your name and where you work, or who you represent, where you're from, very quickly, so that we can continue with the rest of the proceedings. If we can begin from that end. Somebody with me? Just the name and who you represent.
Good morning. My name is Natasha Harvey, and I represent Oil and Energy Services.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andol Nyaga from the Civil Society Platform on Oil and Gas.
Morning, my name is Ongere Churchill. I work with Article 19.
All right, good morning. Mohammed Range, Oil and Gas Lawyer and Lecturer, Strathmore University.
Good morning. My name is Veronica Tayo, LLM student of Oil and Gas Law at Strathmore University.
Good morning. Victor Bett, LLM student at Strathmore University.
Good morning. Victor Kirui, LLM student at Strathmore University.
Morning. Dinette Nyaga. I work for Pentworth Investments.
Good morning, all. My name is Martin Moore. I'm an LLM student at Strathmore.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Louis Abira. I'm a Masters of Law student, Oil and Gas at Strathmore.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Kigen. I'm from Cardinal Emerging Markets.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Lea from Isla College of Technology, part of Strathmore Educational Trust.
Morning, everyone. My name is Lawrence Mjenga from National Oil Corporation of Kenya.
Good morning. My name is Simon Kingori from Companionship of Works Organization.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Hareria. I'm a legal practitioner, and I'm also an LLM student at Strathmore University.
Good morning. My name is Franco Parisham from Akelis. I'm the commercial manager for East Africa, and we have regional offices here in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania.
Good morning, I'm Jacinta Mbide, working for the Companionship of Works Organization. It's an organization in bridging skill gap.
Morning, my name is Consolata Njehia, working for St. Kizito Vocational Training Institute.
Good morning, I'm Patrick Njoroge from St. Kizito Vocational Training Institute.
Good morning, my name is Eric Deche. I work for the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA.
Good morning, my name is Hans Meijers. I'm an independent consultant nowadays. Before that, I spent 25 years with Tullow and Shell in East and West Africa.
Morning, everybody. My name is Alan Wenda from National Oil Corporation of Kenya.
Good morning, my name is Maria Kirima. I'm a legal practitioner and an NLM student at Strathmore University.
Good morning. My name is Samuel Bambua. I come from Astral Aviation. In Africa, we are flying 52 destinations, and in Kenya, we are flying all over Kenya. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is George Wachira. I'm an independent consultant with the Petroleum Focus Consultants.
Morning, my name is Karen Ten. I'm from Baraza Oil and Gas, small SME business.
Good morning, I'm Irene Makali, and I'm an engineering consultant at SMEC International.
Good morning, I'm Khalid Omar, and I'm Head of Business Development for Africa for SMEC International.
Lucy Jogona from Kenya Extractives program.
Hello, I'm Torhild Rossum. I work in the Norwegian Agency for Development Aid.
Good morning, I'm Amy Tilnes. I'm counsellor at the Norwegian Embassy and managing the Kenyan-Norwegian Oil for Development program here in Kenya.
Good morning, I'm Nive Kutwa from Kenya Extractives program.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Onyango from Kenya Extractives program.
Good morning, my name is Tobias. I'm working for the Kenyan Business Guide.
Good morning, I'm Damaris Karaoke, working for Kenya Business Guide as well.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Gethe with SLB.
Good morning all, I'm Susan Munyori, working with Tano Oil.
Hi everyone, my name is Esther. I'm working for KC Global Procurement. We deal with logistics and supply chain management for oil and gas.
Good morning, my name is Stella Opakas. I'm the Director for Mineral Resources in Turkana County.
Good morning, my name is Malcolm Marega. I serve as a Health and Safety Advisor at OptiSafe Kenya.
Good morning, I'm Mark Essex from Oxford Policy Management.
So show project leader of the Kenya Business Guide.
Good morning, Doris Mirigi, SL Africa.
Good morning, my name is Anthony Paul and I'm a consultant from Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning. Once again, I'm Melba Wasuna, and may I say I'm so happy that my students are here. Just so the rest of you know, we are up and running. Strathmore master students are up and running. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Malaki Ekal, Senator Trugani.
Good morning. I am Martin Nakuku from Cardinal International Development.
Morning, I'm Wendy Anyaga from Oil and Energy Services.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alaka Lugonzo from the Association of Women in Energy and Extractives.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Mabuti, and I am from the Extractives Baraza.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grace Alot. I'm from the Extractives Baraza.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hanan Ibrahim. I work with Energy Solutions Africa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ivana Choi. I'm from SL Africa.
Good morning. My name is Susan Tu, an energy economist.
Good morning. My name is Esther Moro from Society of Petroleum Engineers, Kenyatta University.
Good morning. My name is Edwin Mamani, SL Africa.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Faith Waigwa. I'm a legal practitioner and a student of LLM at the university, Strathmore University.
Good morning. My name is Julius Mulati from Africa Oil.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ebo Mongela, and I'm an oil and gas LLM student from Strathmore University.
Good morning. I'm Paul Mwandi, Mado Organization.
Good morning, Simon Macharia, Mando Organization.
Good morning. My name is Gloria Wawira from the Parliament of Kenya.
Good morning, my name is Cliff Ortega. I'm a director with Standard & Mutual. We're a project advisory and consulting firm. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm James Obaki from Extractives Baraza.
And for those who just stepped into the room, my name is Davis Osoro, your host for the day, and I am from Oxfam, Kenya. There seems to be a certain memo, Melba, did you tell your students sit on one side? Like everybody was just that end, and KX Pro at the table behind there. So I think when I look at the room, I think it's such a diverse pool of delegates, and I think this is a very good thing. So moving on to the next order of business. We have, in preparation for this particular meeting, a validation, a technical paper was developed, and this was supposed to sort of inform the conversation around local content. To help us to take us through this particular technical paper is Mwende Nyaga. Mwende Nyaga has worked for over 13 years in the oil and gas sector, 6 of those in the private sector, both in government, both with the oil companies, and as an entrepreneur himself. And for 7 years also worked as a consultant for government, advising government on the upstream oil and gas sector. And since that time, over this period, he has maintained a very deep research on oil and gas, and he supports both the private sector and the public sector on oil and on the upstream, upstream and downstream oil development. He's also extended his experience in actually trying to support initiatives around community development that interlink with the oil and gas sector. So thank you very much, Mwendia.
Morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's still early in the morning, so don't try to be a bit gloomy. Apparently there were two types of experiences this morning. Some people came straight here, no traffic, they didn't understand what was happening this Monday morning. And then others were in traffic for a long time and getting jittery in their cars. I don't know which class you fall in. I was in the second one. So I got here at 8:35 and thinking I'll find people seated and presentation going on, and I was very apprehensive about that. But here I am. Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you so much too for Strathmore to have thought I could be useful in this process. I participated in the previous dialogue where we were discussing about revenue management. Here I am again now, and we talk about local content policy options for Kenya. A very interesting dialogue. First things first. First, I have to thank the people who prepared the paper, because I didn't have to spend too much time to prepare for this. But when Melba asked me to come and present the paper, it's probably the first time I have been asked to present a paper that was not mine. So I wrote her an email and asked her, Melba, what do you mean? Do you want me to critique the paper, or do you want me to talk about the paper, or what do you want? Her answer was that you present the paper, but give us the Kenyan perspective of things. And so that's what I'm here to do. So of course the disclaimer is that I am not the preparer of the paper, so if you find things you don't agree with, just don't disagree with me, okay? But obviously it's unlikely that you would agree with everything that's presented in any paper. I also don't agree with everything that is presented in that paper. But I must say that largely a lot of research has been done on what's been going on in Kenya, especially from the regulatory angle, and what are the initiatives going on in terms of trying to develop capacity for local content. The paper has 5 sections. There's an introductory section. Okay, it's a scholar's paper, so before you get to introduction, there's a lot of stuff there. I think about 4 pages are consumed, or 5 pages of 32 are consumed in some preliminaries. And then it has a chapter on introduction and overview. It has a chapter on a policy, legal and policy framework, in fact asking whether the legal framework is adequate. It has a third chapter on harnessing partnerships to foster local content. That's basically the activities that are already going on in here. A fourth chapter talking about different options and comparative analysis of different countries in the world that have been through this path before us. And lastly, a chapter, perhaps the shortest, talking about the priority issues. Although I think in the next 2 days, maybe that's where most of the discussion will actually be focused on what are the priority issues in there. So I'll follow the same format in my presentation. I know I've been given 40 minutes, quite short for a 32-page paper, so I may not cover every content in there. Right. In the introduction, I think the paper prepared by the policy working group seeks to invoke thoughts in ad analysis to inspire dialogue. But I think that's the stage at which we are right now. I see part of the team in the room right now is working on local content policy for Kenya. And so this is an important discussion to have now than to have it later when a policy has already been written. Perhaps worse still, like almost happened. We almost had some laws passed even before we had a discussion on what we're trying to achieve or what local content is. So I think this is really the right time to do that. It does also take into account the proposed local content laws and priorities and objectives advanced by the government. There's a section on why local content matters, and for me, this is really the beginning of this local content discussion. I think when different people are thinking about local content, they have different things in mind. If you're a businessman like me, you may just think about the profits to be made in here. If you are an oil company, you perhaps have different thoughts about why local content would matter. And if you're a government, again, you are a political government, you seek votes every 5 years, and so you also want to show people that you care about them. And if you are the community out there who are directly affected by the activities, then you have your thoughts. And many times my thoughts go to that fence line community, the community which is seeing the activities as they happen, as opposed to the people in Nairobi who read the stories in the newspapers. Usually the story in the newspaper it's usually correct unless it affects you. Do you know that? Yeah? If you are part of the story or you are deeply involved in what was going on that generated this story, you have a different view of the story, but the other reader will always say, see what they're doing after reading the story in the newspaper. So the communities are directly affected. They can see what's going on. And one of my views has been when we were going to Turkana in the year 2000, around 2007, 2008, when these blocks were being licensed, and seeing the communities, how they lived then, and then seeing the communities, how they live now. Recently, a couple of years ago, I got involved in some activities in other blocks in Turkana, where we would drive long distances in Turkana North, and at some point run out of network. And before you run out of network, you call home and say, I am gone for 2 days. Then I will be back into coverage after 2 days. And you're looking at these communities, and you're carrying your own food and bottles of water and accommodations in the pickup and all that. So when you stop, you are somewhat self-contained. And then everybody else around here doesn't have enough water, doesn't have enough infrastructure, doesn't have a lot of things. And so they would hope that one day, if these people should find oil, would at least want to live the way they live. And you can't blame anybody for aspiring for something like that. And so I think them, when they think about local content, they're thinking, will I be involved in such a way that I am also living the kind of life that I'm seeing the people working in these activities being involved in. Of course, the companies, they want to create a sustainable industry. There has been argument, I think sustainable arguments that local content can eventually reduce cost of activities. And of course, government has economic and political reasons. So there are so many different reasons which should guide our discussion on why local content should matter. What is required for local content development? I think there's a general consensus that we need to build capacity, we need to create more employment, we need to build more capacity and skills in people and in businesses that are going to be involved in here. I think we have a general consensus around that, so no need to talk too much around that. In the introduction, there's a discussion of a current status. I think I tried to update a few things here a little bit. The previous presenter has also talked about this a little bit. Of course, we know there has been discoveries in Turkana since 2012. The numbers of the resources have been changing. We've had 750 million barrels with an expectation of 1 billion. I think the numbers have come down significantly now. If you read the recent announcements by Tullow Oil, I think specifically one released on 7th of February. If you look in the Tullow website, you'll find their annual report there, which discusses quite a bit more around the Kenyan reserves now. We always talked about resources. Now we talk about reserves. There's a big difference between the two. Resources is basically potential, what can be in there, what can be produced from in there. But in reserves, you start talking about what can be produced economically and for profit. And that makes a big difference as well. So for the scholars in the room, always note the difference between resources and reserves and don't use the two interchangeably. The reserves is a number that we're saying can be produced economically, and that's important. And that figure has come, I think, down to a high of around 560 million barrels and a low of somewhere around 200 and something million barrels. Read that paper, you see what you get. Again, there's been mention of oil pilot scheme this morning. I think this is the now showing because it's been on the headlines in the last couple of days. And we also, perhaps have also read there's a big event happening in Turkana on Sunday, 3rd of June. State House did say that the president will be flagging off some trucks. So I think that's a big event happening. Only that I think it has been miscovered in many ways. Nobody wants to look at it as a scientific process. Everybody wants to get commercial justification for it. And of course you find none. And when you find not much commercial justification, then you rubbish the whole process and say it shouldn't have happened. I'm not saying anybody in the room has been doing that. Perhaps most importantly, and this is where really the main activity comes in, is that there is a full-field development which is still in the planning stage. And again, from publicly available information, the final investment decisions will be made in late 2019. And I think that's really important. And for me, that's when the next stage of Kenya's project does come in. For all practical purposes, the Ari oil pilot scheme, as much as we're saying it puts Kenya onto the map of oil producers, is still part of the exploration and appraisal process, in my view. Now, full-field development is what does actually bring us to the stage of oil development and production. And that now takes us to the big scale activities for which really we need to have this discussion of local content, because that's when we have the potential, the projects with the potential to bring perhaps much larger economic benefits to the people of Kenya. And those benefits will come in many ways. There's direct employment, supply of goods and services. Brian mentioned in the morning about that people don't even quite understand that the value is not in the interaction with oil itself. It's perhaps in the indirect goods and services that are provided for in the sector. 2 years ago, we carried out a research for somebody who wanted to understand the economic activities along the Lapset corridor and how well business people along that corridor are prepared to interact business-wise with the projects that will come in. I mean, almost uniform, all the way from Lamu through Garissa, Wajir, Isiolo to Turkana, that people knew there are big projects expected to come in around here. Anybody you asked, somebody who runs a small hardware shop and, or has a small equipment there, they know that. When will the projects come? They have no idea. What project will come before the other? They have no idea. And perhaps most importantly, when we ask them, okay, should the projects come next year? Should they come now? Do you know what opportunity those projects hold for you? And the sad answer was that these people don't know. They just know there will be big projects with big opportunities. But what opportunities? They say, but you see, the government doesn't tell us. Isn't that a sad situation? Yes, it is. And I think that's again something we need to start thinking about. And this paper has identified the information asymmetry as one of the reasons why local content initiatives may not be that successful. Okay? So next we go into definitions, the definitions of local content. As we know, we have three main legislative initiatives into local content that directly affect oil and gas. But as I'll show you a little later, there has been much more that has been legislated with local content in mind in our country today. So you have the definition in the Petroleum Bill, and I think it just changed slightly in the last couple of weeks when it went back to Parliament. But you have the definition there, added value brought to Kenyan economy from petroleum operations through systematic development of national capacity and capabilities and investments in developing and procuring locally available workforce, services, and supplies for the sharing of accruing benefits. And by the sharing of accruing benefits, you realize that that somehow is speaking from the Constitution, because the Constitution did point out that benefits from these resources need to be shared. And then you have another definition there coming out of the Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production Local Content Regulations. These are draft regulations developed in 2014. The intention was at that time that they will run in tandem with the Petroleum Bill mentioned on the first bullet, and that by the time the Petroleum Bill gets enacted, then the local content regulations will also be signed by the Cabinet Secretary and become part of the law. However, there was a much outcry from especially the industry, which rightly so pointed that there's not even been any discussion. Then the regulation set a set of targets, and the industry asked, on what basis did you set the target? How did you know what was possible and what was not possible? Do you have a baseline? Do you have, and a lot of questions were asked, and I think the Ministry of Energy then, I think, listened and realized that we need to do a little more work before we start setting some specific targets. And so these regulations are still in draft form, and I think they're also subject of a consultancy that's going on now to be reviewed alongside the development of local content policy. And then you have the Local Content Bill, 2016, developed by the Senate. This process also took place a couple of years, I think from 2014. A lot of things happened in 2014 because the industry in Kenya was booming. Despite it having been at an exploration stage, I think 2014 was the one single year that we drilled so many wells in this country. And so a lot of activity was going on at that time. And so many guys were also thinking, okay, so how shall Kenyans benefit in here? So you'll see that despite this bill having been published in 2016, actually the work did start in 2014, and the Senate developed these. Personally, I had some issues with the bill because on one part it tried to focus on petroleum, and then I think that the writers would at some point think, no, it should be extractives. So they would go into extractives and talk about extractives, and they remember, no, wait a minute, this petroleum, we need to get something from it. So for me, I found some mix-up in it around there. I found other mix-ups in relation to, and that has been talked about a lot in this paper. What is local content? Is it the local area where the activity is, or is it the country? I think there was some little bit of mix-up in there. You have your own opinion, of course, if you read it. And that's the definition that the paper presented. In overall, I don't think there's a big conflict in what all these people are thinking in terms of the definition of what local content is. And I think we found that when we went to the first local content exchanges in July last year, when you would hear that a lot of people are thinking provision of goods and services, use of local manpower in a sustainable way. How do we ensure that it's sustainable? How do we make sure that there's value added in whatever is happening in here and value provision? I realized I've taken half of my time. Only at the introduction stage. So allow me to move a little bit faster. So I think the paper concludes in the definition that local content remains, the definition remains unsettled here. And the divide, there's a conflict between nationalistic approach and localistic approach. The paper does quite clearly conclude that, and it gives the view of what is a localistic approach. This is the regional, local approach. There are sometimes in the industry we call it local, meaning local Kenya, then local in the area of operation. But it then goes on to give a very, very nice definition of nationalistic approach, being equitable participation at all stages of the petroleum value chain. I quite like that. And I thought that my own view would be how we can have a seamless combination of these two to ensure that the fence line communities feel the benefit through some form of affirmative action. There must be affirmative action. Why? Because these communities, in their level of economic and educational development is not at the same, is not in tandem with some other parts of the country. So if you want them then to be involved in here, I think you need to go make an extra effort to do that. So yeah, get the benefits to them through affirmative, some form of affirmative action, and have equitable participation at all stages of the petroleum value chain across the country. So it doesn't mean discriminate against the other people, but it means identifying some specific opportunities that these fence line communities can participate in and engaging in the right initiatives to be able to bring them in. So I feel that any kind of policy needs to take those two into account and not any of them separately. There's some discussion about quantitative measures and qualitative measures, but basically just to say what this means is that quantitative measures means we are dealing with percentages and numbers, and you must achieve this, and you must achieve this, and you get punished if you don't. And the qualitative measures are let's work together. Let's discuss what is possible. Let's discuss the initiatives we should engage in to be able to develop this. And you'll find that in many successful local content systems, there has been a mix of the two. You'll find that through legislation, there's requirements to do some certain very specific things, but also there is also a big discussion and initiatives going on where industry works with government and with the business, with the private sector to continuously improve on the participation of the private sector and local communities. I will quickly just point out at the legal frameworks that have been put in place in Kenya, talking about local content. And I must admit that I knew there were many, but until I read this paper, I hadn't quite appreciated how many there are. And so, my view at this stage is that anybody who has been going around saying the government doesn't care about local content, please think twice. Because if they have done all this, it means they have been thinking about it. They may not have done it the way you would be happy with, but I think it means they have been thinking about it. It starts in the Constitution, specifically Section 69, that talks about sharing the benefits. It does also talk about environmental sustainability. And I think that kind of gives foundation to the whole discussion. It talks about extraction of natural resources in an environmentally sustainable manner, and while ensuring that the benefits arising from that are shared with the people who are affected. And then we have the CAP 308, the existing Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, which has one summarized clause that purely says that the contractor and its subcontractors shall express preference to Kenyan goods and services and employment of Kenyan manpower, right? Something like that. It doesn't say much after that. The rest is in the production sharing contract. There's some 2 clauses in the production sharing contract. When you look at the model production sharing contract, that try to expand that a little bit. There's some critics say that that ends up with a disclaimer of as long as the place, the price, the quality, there is the same as would be gotten internationally. And this is in the interest of the oil companies, because they also don't want to be pushed to consume anything. So it's kind of good and bad. It gives anybody who is not willing, it gives them an easy way out, that identify the right quality or price. But also, you don't want to jeopardize the operations by pushing anything in there. Okay, and then there's also the training fund, which is established under the same act. And companies which have licenses in Kenya do contribute to that training fund. It is contractual. They sign up that they will contribute a certain amount per year to the training fund. So that's contractual in today's legal framework. Then you have natural resources, classes of transactions subject to Ratification Act. Again, you may recall that in our constitution, it does provide that contracts relating to natural resources will be subject to ratification by Parliament. And that Parliament shall enact a law to define how they're going to ratify this. And this act came in response to that. What does this one say? It says consideration of the fair balance between interests of the beneficiary and those of the country, speaks directly to the issue of local content. There's also need to ensure the local community benefits from the transaction. Again, you can see that the people who wrote that act had in mind the benefits of especially the local communities. You have the Public Procurement and Disposal Act 2015. This was a revision of a hard to implement 2005 Act. And it goes up strong to dedicate 40% of supplies from cities and contractors. But you will see that this act is specifically thinking about international tenders. And I think it's also specifically thinking that this supplier will be an international company will be a foreign company coming from someplace internationally. It does provide exclusive preference to citizen contractors in the case of tenders worth less than 500 million, where such projects are wholly funded by the national government, county government, or Kenyan body. Without thinking too much about who's funding it, why are we saying up to 500 million? This mentality is what? That the Kenyan company should only do the small things? Maybe. That's my view. And when we talk about local content in the petroleum sector, we sometimes find ourselves in the same trap. When we start to say that make sure all unskilled jobs are given to the locals. Don't we say that? We say that all the time. It's a good initiative, yes. But perhaps the more important bit would be how do we enable the locals to participate in the higher jobs which require skilled labor, some semi-technical training and stuff like that. So you would see that this could be in the fabric of national thinking, that we are thinking local content for the small jobs. Without thinking, what are the skills required to carry out the big jobs? Maybe local companies can carry out the big jobs, They may not have the technology to develop some downhole services, but they may have technology and ability to build capacity to carry out some fairly large above the ground jobs, which are relatively less technical. And that's something we need to think about. The same argument goes on when you look at the National Construction Authority regulations of 2014. Any foreign company, remember? Foreign company. Any foreign company seeking registration in Kenya must give undertaking to enter into JV with local company persons for not less than 30% of the contract value. Again, is think about the foreign company coming into partner with the local company. But these two acts are not focusing specifically with the local companies which are carrying out large projects and how much of foreign materials and services are they using compared to how much they are using locally. You have more laws here. There's Technical, Vocational and Training Act, which talks about ensuring increased sustained enrollment ratio of 20% by the year 2030, and the provisions require the TVET institutions to adopt appropriate national and international standards to training for international standards. That's a good one, wanting to upgrade the standards to international levels. We have the Petroleum Exploration Development and Production Bill, which requires the petroleum companies to employ and engage qualified Kenyans, give priority to goods and services in Kenya, provided they are acceptable in the Kenyan and international standards. Petroleum development, then you have some regulations in there. But perhaps one big significant input or inclusion in this act was the requirement for local content plans, continuous development and updating of local content plans, that anybody who is carrying out this activity, that matter whether you're a local company or international, you must develop a local content plan, which will then be reviewed by the authority, and that authority is so far has been Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, and then. Because the development and review of the plan is, to me, a collaborative process. That there will be this is a discussion tool where you present it to the government, and then before it's approved, you can have a discussion with the government on why can't you improve this, why can't you improve on this, and then it goes on to even specify some items you need to think about in the local content plan. So it talks about supply of goods and services, talks about employment, talks about technology transfer, talks about legal services, financial services, and more. So that effort, I think, is a good effort, is a collaborative one. We've talked about the Local Content Bill 2016, and which also has, really is focused on local content. It talks about having a monitoring unit, which is also addressed in the Petroleum Bill, the monitoring unit being the authority. And then you have the Energy Bill 2015. Again, it has draft local content regulations, just like the Petroleum Bill has. And then you have the National Energy and Petroleum Policy. Always forgotten. Nobody seems to really think about this one. I got involved at the beginning when it started being developed. And it was clear at that time that we don't have enough time to develop a local content policy. And so what we did was to ask, can it at least provide that the government shall develop a local content policy? So in the policy, it requires development of a policy. That's all I can say about that. So what's the conclusion about the legal frameworks in here? The paper says that in its view, there does exist, this is our view. The paper suggests there's an incongruence in terms of definitions. We kind of think so, yes. There is some incongruence within the local content requirements in various regulations, as you have seen in very much brief. And it is not mostly in the definition, but on the variations in the measurement of local content successes and the approaches to that local content. And we do feel that these can be brought together by first having this discussion of what are we trying to achieve, how shall we achieve it, and then we make sure that all the other legislations, both existing and future ones, are in tandem with what did we have as a national discussion on what local content is, what are we trying to achieve with it, what approach shall we take. Before we have that, then we're going to continue having different ones, and the Senate proposed bill was one evidence of, if I feel nobody is doing anything, I am going to try and do something. We have seen this in the banking sector, have we not? When, okay. I have 100 minutes, sorry, 10 minutes, 10 minutes to go. I don't have too many slides remaining, I think we will make it. Yeah, we've seen it in the banking sector, where when some legislators feel nobody seems to care how much you're paying for loans, we're going to try and do something. A good old Dode tried, Honorable Dode tried to regulate, to bring regulation of interest rates in Parliament. He didn't make it, and I think everybody thought it is now gone. Until it came back last year, and this time it came back just near elections, right? Just the right timing, and nobody could stop that storm. And eventually, whatever was passed, the banking sector says it's not favorable to us. So I think that is exactly what is reflected by the bill by the Senate, where somebody feels nothing is being done here, we must do something. But I think when we have a common discussion, then we'll achieve something. There is some discussion about challenges there, which challenges to local content. Not talking too much through it. There's lack of unification of various existing and proposed regulations. That's what we just talked about for the last 20 minutes. Lack of independent regulator to monitor and enforce relevant local content provisions. Yes, it is not there, but we are also hopeful that in case this petroleum bill gets passed, and we have been told to get passed quickly because the last hurdle has been removed, which was the sharing of revenues, then we will have an upstream petroleum regulatory authority in place, and part of its mandate is to basically monitor, regulate local content activities. Lack of specialized skills, that's generally accepted. I talked about that before. Other development of local supply chain, we do know that. Perhaps I should also have, maybe we should add infrastructure, other than just the local supply chain itself. We've seen what happens when more than normal rains come, and suddenly we have no roads, and we had no bridges even then, even before that. So something we need to think about. Something that's so important is the information asymmetry. When we think about the information asymmetry, all the time I hear speaker after speaker talk about how the local companies, local people, local private sector, whoever it is, don't understand, one, the industry, two, what does the industry need, and all that. But apparently, I am starting to also think, and I think I'm right, that the companies themselves, they don't know what local capacity exists. So the information asymmetry is not just on one part. It could be that the companies who are expected to be the implementers or the buyers of the local content also don't understand what they can find locally, what exists. And remember, they have come from different countries. They have experiences from those countries, and they will carry those experiences and try to paint the same experience where they land. But perhaps maybe there should be a bit more effort to showcase that there is more than you think. We have several initiatives which I'll not go through in a lot of details here that are taking place in Kenya today, and I'm sure there are many more. Only last week we were in a conference organized by the Morenat Institute for Oil and Gas, Kenya Pipeline Company, trying to build Center of Excellence for Oil and Gas. And they keep talking about how in the heads of states and Commonwealth heads of states and governments, no, it was not that. But somewhere in 2013 or 2014, presidents of Northern Corridor in East Africa met and said, we want Moreda to be the center of excellence. What I would ask APC is that, can you stop telling us about this and tell us, now we have developed to this. This is what we are doing now. These are the trainees we have. These are the number of graduates we have from this institute. These are the standards we are following to make sure that we are really training people who are ready to work in the industry. I think, and I was sad that in the, sorry, is there anybody from KPC? Just asking. There's nobody. Perhaps next time there should be Melba. Yeah. But one of the KPC presenters at the University of Nairobi last week, is it last week?
Yes.
Yeah, said that there are only 3 qualified welders in Kenya. And yet, this institute is supposed to train some of these people. They did not tell us, because of that shortage, we have enrolled this number, that we believe when they graduate, then the number of qualified welders will be this much. Of course, a lot of people also don't get that. It means those people who can weld a pipeline with products inside, not just connecting pipeline. Okay, so it's a high skill. Okay, the skill for oil and gas program, SOGA, in Kenya. There is a base titanium technical trade apprenticeship program, and I take pride in that. I was in the initial team that carried out the study of Kwale and basically reviewed the preparedness of local people to provide goods and services to base titanium and all that, which then led to the current program. There's Lodwar Vocational Training Center. Again, I take pride in having worked with Ludin Foundation in 2013 in the study that identified this polytechnic as the place where they want to bring in the interventions. Shell Game Changer and other supporting programs, and I believe Tullow Oil is somehow involved in one part of the initiatives of this program in Turkana, where they're working with civil construction companies and masons and trying to develop their skills. Partnership with academia, LIWA, which I think is a brainchild of the current principal secretary for TVET, which is a really great thing, because I think Dr. Kevin Desai has been in the TVET sector for so long, from the private sector angle and KEPSA. Now going into government to run with these initiatives, I think that was really a great thing. If I was told I had some 30 more minutes, perhaps this would have been the section that you need to look at a little more closely so that you can expand your thinking in terms of the different options. But you have this discussion in the paper around different options used in different countries, from Omani, the in-country value blueprint. It's a very interesting read on what they have done in Oman, the Omanization, an industry initiative, then going into government and getting very deep participation by government on how to increase the value that is left in Oman on the spending from this business. That's basically the main point in their in-country value, which interestingly, when you compare with Trinidad and Tobago, I think Trinidad and Tobago talks about in-country value add. So this is the value add. And I see quite a bit of the discussion we're going to have here is in-country value addition. And then you have Norway and the lucky timing. Interestingly, a lot of people think there were no tough laws in Norway to do this, but you'll find some 1962 decree that was put in place to ensure Norwegian companies get involved in the petroleum value chains. And then there were some interesting initiatives which were not necessarily put as legal requirement, but giving rebates to oil companies or tax incentives to oil companies that enhance more local content. So it's like, if you do this and you spend more money, we're going to give you some tax benefit. So it's also a combination of both there. You got Brazil, again, a very, very successful local case. There is also some legal requirements where contractors are asked to meet some certain local content requirements, or I don't want to call them requirements, because when you're bidding for oil and gas blocks, you are asked that you must commit to some certain local content requirements in there, and there are huge penalties in there. But you also see Brazil has spent a lot of time in carrying out initiatives through the national oil company to improve on technology for the local supply chains and all that. And I think there are also some big financing plans in Brazil which have been quite successful. You have Nigeria and Ghana, both which also have a mix of both. Nigeria tried a few failed things, and then later was able to, they passed this Local Content Act in 2010, which appears to have quite rejuvenated things. Before then they had a policy developed in 2000, which was not very successful. And the Local Content Act of 2010 actually does require you by law to partner with Nigerians. But it also goes ahead to kind of suggest, if you can't partner with Nigerians, then set up shop in Nigeria. So I attended a local content conference in Nigeria some 3 years ago, and they are now emphasizing on domiciliation as opposed to domestication. So it doesn't have to be owned in Nigeria by Nigerians, but can it be set up in Nigeria? That way you'll find that you have to employ people from the country, and then they'll learn some things in the game. And Ghana has its percentages. I hear we copied our draft local content regulations from there, and I hear they had copied from Nigeria. And you know, one thing about Nigeria and Ghana is that they are mainly offshore. Of course, Nigeria still has quite a bit of onshore in the Niger Delta area. But the big operations are offshore, and they're the ones which were targeted mainly by these legal provisions. And then Ghana is also mainly offshore, and then Kenya is mainly onshore. So I've had the privilege of having a good look at those regulations and actually realizing that most of the services you talk about here are not onshore services, they are offshore. So that could be a main thing that needs to be looked at. Coming to the end now, in the paper, you have a list of priority issues that need to be highlighted. And my question is, perhaps the team having discussions through today and tomorrow is, are these the only issues? This is the issue of how can we contextualize local content in emerging oil and gas sector in Kenya. A localist, national stake versus regional approach. I have a big issue with the regional approach. Not because I do not support regional integration. I certainly think they are very beneficial. But almost the world over, local content provisions seem to be very country focused. And so a regional approach then means you have to carry out a number of negotiations, cross-border negotiations. And remember, maybe the circumstances could be different. Tanzania is talking about LNG. Most of the gas is actually offshore. Liquefied natural gas plants. Different circumstance from Kenya and Uganda, who are mainly onshore. Tanzania is talking about gas, Kenya and Uganda are talking about oil, and Rwanda is still exploring around its Lake Kivu region. Burundi certainly has prospectivity. I know they have 4 blocks, but they are far behind in the whole process. So how do you carry out a regional approach to this? I think that would mean you'll be trying for another 10, 15 years before you get anywhere. And by the way, Norway had to repeal a number of its legal provisions as part of their preparation to join the EU. That happened. So you realize that regional approach may not necessarily be a very easy attempt. How can Kenya maximize in-country value addition? You have the examples of Oman and Norway. So that's a discussion to have, and really I think that's the gist of local content. Increase the in-country value as much as you can in a sustainable way though. How can Kenya build local capacity? and incentivize local participation. I think we must go full out to again sustainably develop local capacity, but also taking into account if oil and gas was not there, what would we do with this capacity and skills? Are they transferable to other sectors? I think priority should be to what is also transferable to other sectors. Should private sector contribute to local content policy in the sector? I think the answer is yes. And I will not go through those bullets there. How can government maximize development of local content across the industry sectors? Again, is that an issue? Yes. And the main question we ask ourselves here, are these the only issues? Perhaps it's not good to have a list of 10 issues. But maybe you need to look at them, see whether you can combine some, and whether you can also add other issues. So in my conclusions, I think one of the observations is that there has been many initiatives which are disjointed. However, even if they are that disjointed, they do express the interest of all parties involved to develop and promote local content. I think one of the perhaps less known things is what the industry is doing itself. So maybe Susan, you need to tell people about what you're doing within your company as well. Because my own understanding is of Tullow Oil as a company that is deeply and strongly committed to working with local companies and developing local content. And they carry out a lot of work within there, which shows the industry commitment of that. You can see Shell. Shell has almost little activity in the country, and yet they have been engaged in initiatives for promoting local content. So it does show that the parties involved are all warm to the idea. We also think it should be a collaborative approach for parties as a way forward. Let us get out of critiquing what the government is doing or what the so and so is doing, and get together as parties to develop a framework that we believe that will deliver what is necessary for Kenya's private sector and communities and the economy and all that. Thank you so much. I took only 51 minutes. I'm sorry. I kind of overshot.
Thank you very much, Mwendia. I think this was an injustice to you. I think given the experience that you have of the sector, it's like you needed like 3 hours to be able to cover most of what you have to say. Thank you. And I think for those who might really have some burning questions for Mwendia, I don't want to give this opportunity for that, but if there's one burning question on the technical paper that somebody feels that if they go out, they'll forget, I'm just giving one person a chance to ask a question, and then we can break for just one person, and I hope it's a compelling question. And then, of course, the response will not just be Mwendia, but everybody else who took part in the preparation of the.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I just want to pose a question as to whether it would be right to say that local content provisions are actually restrictive trade practices, in the sense that I'm looking at a scenario where you have to have the transfer of technology, which then escalates the costs to the consumer at the end of the day. So there are those who argue that local content basically is a restrictive practice. But I'm in support of local content. Yeah.
So are you responding to that?
Waiting for the mic. But I thought it is another one. Thanks. I think this was 2 years ago when I interacted with a student who was studying, I think it was in Finland, and she was carrying out a study on local content in Kenya, and she also was pairing that with the WTO requirements and saying, are we not going against this and all that. And I had a long chat with her, and she said she will consider changing her approach a little bit. And because I came from the point of view, I remember my whole discussion around the fence line community and what the community is seeing and what the community expects from this. And you extend that to the nation as well. I think the previous speaker before me said these are huge expectations from the industry by the private sector. And I think before her ink had dried, President Donald Trump was elected in America. And he said, put America first. And I thought, oh, actually, despite the WTO requirements and all that, perhaps what we have been talking about is right. Because I think a country must benefit from its own resources. That is important. The one word that should never be forgotten, though, is the sustainability. Because you could push too hard and then you end up going backwards. And experiences of countries like Mexico and Venezuela are there to light, where these countries have perhaps gone overboard and then blocked new technologies from being used in their country because these technologies are going to be forced to be passed to other parties. So it's somewhere a thin line, that's what I would say. Recognize that if somebody has spent 100 years in this industry carrying out research and development and spent billions of dollars in developing their latest technologies, then you can't come and say transfer this to a local company. In fact, even sustainability of that transfer is in big question on whether that would be possible or not. So for me, it's a thin line. A country must benefit from its natural resources. Last night I was reading a stupid paper written by somebody who was talking about Lake Zambia and Lake Kenya, where foreign companies come and fish minerals and then go away with them and stuff like that. It's a very interesting read. But then you think, okay, you can't stop them from getting minerals, but can we also make sure there's as much as possible in-country value that is sustainable? That's how I can say it. Anthony seems like he wants to talk about that later.
Thank you for that. Any other question? Just one more question. Okay. I don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering, looking at the local content and the bill and the legislations that is in the progress, and looking at issues of gender, how do we bring in the issues of gender? My read of the bill is that it's a bit silent on issues of gender at this particular moment. So how best can we then bring this into the legislative framework and ensure that gender issues are also taken into consideration?
I can see Melba is very happy about that. I have also put in brackets and youth. But one, I'm not really a gender and youth expert, I must say so, and I appreciate from an affirmative action point of view the need to promote any disadvantaged group, whether it's gender, whether it's youth, whether it's the people with disability and many more. However, the way I have seen the discussions so far is that I think the discussions are more focused on how do we first ensure that we secure the right thinking as a country. And then, because there is no intention at all to block any group from this participation, perhaps there will be some room for cascading whatever the outcome is and cascading it down now to take care of some specific groups like gender and all that. I don't know whether I should take center stage at this point of the discussion that we are having, and my opinion would be perhaps we need that national view of things, the policy and all, and then start cascading. As long as whatever we are developing as the high-level policy and legal structure does not in any way appear to restrict participation of any of these groups. That's what I would say.
Thank you for that, Media. The industry wants to ask a question.
Wait, before Susan speaks, actually, I'm informed here that a gender assessment has just been conducted in relation to the same thing. So perhaps this cascading I'm talking about would come in sooner than later.
Okay, thank you, Davis, and thank you so much, Media, for that presentation. Not really a question, but I was challenged to say something about what the industry is doing. And perhaps just to mention that what was listed in the technical paper is what is publicly available. And we discussed that with Extractives Baraza, and it was almost difficult for us to provide information that has not been published. But indeed, yes, Mwende, you're right. The industry is doing a lot to support local content development. And there are some examples around asset ownership that has been done in Turkana. We have also, as industry, joined up between Shell, Talo, and a few other partners to also build capacity in construction industry in Turkana and that of masons. We've also, as the KJV, Kenya Joint Venture Partners, established enterprise development centers in 4 areas in Turkana, and these are looking at business skills development. And we are also providing scholarships, bursaries, and various other areas to support the skills development agenda that has already been listed there. I think I also want to mention the Talo Group Scholarship Scheme that had been running for a number of years. And we have an alumni here with us who's a beneficiary of that. Of course, this benefited a number of Kenyans and also a number of Turkanas from those Kenyans. So a number of things have been done. We are getting better at putting our stories together. Because you realize if we don't put it out there, then people do not know that it has actually happened. So it's a fair challenge, and I think we will be upping our game on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you kindly give Mwende another round of applause? So we are running a bit late, and I'll take this opportunity to just welcome you. We have tea and snacks outside for, if you could stay on for just about 15 minutes max. If you not have finished your tea by those, you can just bring them in so we can continue our conversation, so we'll be able to cover much of what we wanted to cover for the day. So kindly, very quickly, grab your tea and then we can continue from there.
Begging for forgiveness. You're not coming here with 10:45 for the Malika. Hata nitembelea unasema kitu. How are you?